There's also.
Okay, calling this meeting back to order. Welcome this evening. Sorry we're running a little late. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, I want to welcome everybody to the special meeting of the Princeton Council. I want to remind everybody to speak up because while this meeting is being recorded, we don't have microphones that project into the room. So make sure everybody can hear, and if people can't hear, let us know. This is part of the council's priority setting for 2020. We're doing a little bit of a different process this year, so we're starting early because department heads are asked to put their budgets together or start to think about putting their budgets together early. So we're trying this to see, make little adjustments to the priority planning every year. So the idea of this meeting is to have a more informal conversation between department heads and council than we would at our formal budget hearing, which will happen later in the spring, to talk about what are the big projects ahead in 2020, what are other pressures on departments and other projects they're working on, and just make sure there's alignment between what department heads are thinking and priorities of council. We want to hear from the public as well. So we will start with comments from the public for items that are not already on the agenda. Is there anybody who wanted to speak to anything that's not already on the agenda? All right, seeing no one, I'm going to close that public comment and we'll start with Deanna Stockton and Engineering Department.
Before we start, just to give context to everyone, I wanted to make sure we had kind of an overview of where we are kind of in the budget process. Just to make it clear in terms of, right now, it's early on in the budget process. The departments are putting together their estimates for the year. You kind of explained a little bit of this earlier. So what they're right now is putting together their estimates for, and there's two components of the budget, one being the capital plan, which is a 6-year outlook, and we're going to really concentrate a lot on the departments, really give you an idea of what their capital plans look like for major projects over the next 6 years. In addition, we'll review some of the big needs on the operational side of the budget. And again, this is early on. A lot of this will change, and we'll be adjusting it as we go through the year. So, this is just a way for us to get input to both council and staff on that process. The other thing I wanted to just put some context on some of the constraints that the department heads are going to be under too, and that's looking at, particularly when we talk about a long-range plan, we do have a debt management policy which constrains the spending at $7.5 million a year, every year annual spending. That being the case, that is one of the constraints. So as we move through the process, we're going to have to prioritize and make some priority decisions on those later on down the road. This time, I think we're
capital spending.
Capital spending. At this time, it's really, let's get all of the information. Staff is going to give you everything that they have, and as you can see, it's going to be more than the $7.5 million that we have as our policy. It's going to be a lot more than that. In addition, the other thing we have to look at is, even though it is debt, there is an impact in the operational budget. So for for capital projects, there's a 5% down payment. If we exceed that 7.5%, which we can, it's a policy decision, so we can go ahead and move forward, but that will be an increase. We'd have to fund that additional amount for the 5%. So as we go through this, I just want to give everyone kind of the context of things.
Great. Thanks. So I just wanted to put it in context for you. The engineering department is in charge of all the infrastructure in our town. If you want to just flip to the next screen, that includes 125 miles of road, 160 miles of sidewalks and pathways, traffic signals, storm sewers. In conjunction with SOC, we also work on the sanitary sewers. We have 5 dams. And then open space parks, public buildings, that's more of the DPW or recreation purview, but engineering touches a lot, obviously, in this is our current org chart for our staff. Under engineering and zoning, as well as our infrastructure team headed up by Tejal Patel. So we've got Tejal and Ian Baker here from engineering tonight as well. So we've got approximately 13 people right now in engineering. I know there's been some discussion about looking at moving sewer operating the engineering and design piece of sewer operating under engineering. And I know we've talked about an additional staff person. So more back in general for what engineering is responsible for. A main area that we focus on is the design, permitting, bidding, and construction management and inspection of all of our infrastructure projects. Added into that, we also help other departments like recreation with their capital projects, DPW with parking infrastructure improvements, tax maps. We oversee a lot of the land use work with planning and zoning, and then working with utility companies, state, county agencies as well. So quite a bit that comes under our department. And so Mark, I think, had provided everybody with this draft 6-year capital plan. And what I did is I took the bottom line for the engineering request and dropped it into this slide. And you'll see that engineering alone would exceed that $7.5 million cap. And so what I typically put in our capital budgets are our big road projects, but then we also include annual maintenance type work. And so that annual maintenance type work are bikeways, sidewalk improvements. If we have trees that need to have disrupted sidewalk and we need to replace sidewalk, we would put it in that type of a contract. If we need to make ADA improvements at curb ramps, or any work related to like the pedestrian and bike facilities at that 160 miles of infrastructure that we have, that's where we try to do an annual contract. And sometimes it's every 2 years instead of every year, but that's a typical line item. We have a road resurfacing contract. It used to be that Princeton tried to look at our roads where every road was touched within 25 years. The industry in general is changing that idea. The industry is going more to a proactive approach where you should be touching roads like every 6 years. But if you just look at our 125 miles of roadway, and if you're looking at every 25 years we're touching a road, that means we should be doing 5 miles of roadway a year. And I think typically we've been averaging about 3.5 miles, just to put that in perspective. Then we also work on an annual siding and striping contract of just refreshing all of the paint and signs that you see on the roads, and we do that in conjunction with Public Works as well. We actually both budget for it. DPW has it in an operations budget as well as a capital budget, and now I also have it in a capital budget. So for 2020, I've actually cut back our request because it is duplicated in their budgets. And then a drainage contract. So typically we've been working with DPW of any inlets that they can't repair that we would put out to bid and have a contractor come in to work on it. But that only touches a small part of our stormwater system. It's only talking about those inlets in the roads. We also have outfalls that we really need to step up our review of, as well as prioritizing repairs. This was something that came out of the TP audit. And so that's going to be a work plan that we're putting together to work with DPW on to see how we can add that into our system. Yes?
Just had a quick question. You mentioned the fact that we've only been doing about 3.5 miles versus the 5 miles a year that we should be doing. Have we been budgeting for 5 miles a year, and have we been spending the last, I mean, my recollection from past years is we've been spending less than what we budgeted for that kind of work.
We have not been budgeting for 5 miles. And as with things lately, so that 5 miles would be in the perfect world, but things get added in now with all the ADA requirements. They've determined if you resurface a road, you then have to upgrade all of the handicap ramps. So that just adds to the cost. And so I don't know, we would then have to add on top of our asphalt costs for all of that additional sidewalk work. And right now,
So
sidewalk.
in this budget,
Mhm.
that's, which is more than our entire capital budget for the
Yes.
year, about how much roadway would you guesstimate?
We put $2 million into this capital budget, and I would say we're probably still around 3 miles.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's really looking at what we try to do annually. And then we now have the Nassau Streetscape, which is a new piece that we want to build into that annual allocation of resources as well. And then if we flip to the next page, we have our big projects that get built into the budget. So every year there's grant opportunities to help fund our projects without having tax resources going to those. And so for 2021, actually, we have a grant for Witherspoon Street, and that would be improvement from Nassau Street to Green Street. But because we have to award the project by March of 2021, we have to budget it for next year's budget, because our budget won't be available for 2021 in time. So that's definitely a project that I can say that we're not going to spend the money next year, but we have to have it in place next year for the following year. So that's one of the big ticket items. And then Pretty Brook Road has come up on our radar of really needing work. And if you're familiar with that road, it's narrow, it's got
I'm sorry,
drainage
what road
ditches.
I missed?
Pretty
Pretty Brook, sure.
Yeah, it's narrow, it's got drainage ditches, it's got guide rail, we're in the C1 waterway with the Stony Brook right there. So, and that road's over a mile long as well. So that's one that we're gonna be jumping into this fall and winter on looking at improvements. And I've actually broken up the cost for that project over 2 years. Because we're hoping to maybe break the project up in 2, depending on how the permitting shakes out for that project. So a lot of our big projects are grant related, except Pretty Brook. So then in 2021, we have Mount Lucas Road, which we've submitted a grant application for, thinking that that's going to be constructed in 2022.
Can we just go back for a second to Witherspoon Street, because I know there's the 610K grant, but looking at the document Mark put together, under 2020, it has 3.8 million on Witherspoon
Correct.
Street.
That's the anticipated cost, construction cost.
In 2020? No.
In-
Okay, because it's all that whole sum is in 2020.
Correct.
Okay.
Because we need to have the money in place to award a contract March of 2022. And typically our capital funds aren't available until about July each year. And so there's no way we could award the project in 2022 if we hadn't put them in the, 2021 if we hadn't budgeted for it next year.
And that's the case with most of the capital projects. You have to plan ahead because of the cycle of when capital ordinances are put in place, so that you are anticipating, usually it may happen either the end of that year or the beginning of the following year when this project will
And,
start.
and is that, I'm sorry, just to clarify the 3.8 million, is that something that we have to have available as cash in the bank, or is that something we're bonding?
We're bonding.
Okay.
Right, and all of the grants that we get, they're reimbursable. So you have to have all of the money in hand to award the contracts, and then you get reimbursed after the fact.
Deanna, can we go back to Freebrook really fast? Is that widening Freebrook or just improving
Just
through
improving
the
it.
existing footprint of the road?
That's what we're looking at, but we may need to look at putting drainage and curbing in, instead of having open ditches. So until we get a good survey of the roadway, which we're gonna be putting out an RFP, I think, in the next month to do the survey work, we don't have a good sense of what's gonna happen there. But it's very narrow, we can't widen. You have steep slopes.
And then you have Stony Brook right at the edge.
Exactly, yeah, you have Stony Brook right on the edge of parts of it, so definitely not widening, but looking at improvements. And then just going through it, 2022, we also have another grant project that shows up in the, in my capital budget, because that is the federal Safe Routes to School grant that we just were notified that we received $1 million towards. And so what we're looking at is, I've actually, starting in 2020, I've started budgeting the design money with the idea that we can take part in a design assistance program from the state, which will reimburse us for design. And they set a limit for how much money can be spent by the consultants for each of these types of projects. And so that's what I've put into our budget over a 2-year period, thinking we'll go through a preliminary design phase and then a final design phase. And then all of that gets reimbursed when we submit invoices. But then the actual construction cost is what shows up in 2021 for 2022 for that improvement. So I think that's really a big overview of how we've done our budgeting. I don't have set ideas that, X percentage of a budget goes towards this type of improvement. I don't say, 50% for roads, 25% for sidewalks. I don't do that. We really look at the needs that we have, and then budget from there. So like one topic that keeps coming up are various pathway improvements. So we've got one project to extend the Route 27 side path from Snowden Lane to Prospect Avenue Extension. That's part of, it would help with our hazardous busing. It would also help the residents move through that corridor, because you do have the state highway and traffic speeds at about 50 miles an hour. So that's one project that's on my radar, but then we also have needs on Elm Road with the side path there. It needs attention, and then you look out at the Quaker Road bike path. That has come up as, we really should look at paving that. So I don't know if there's any feedback you can give me out of those 3 types of pedestrian bicycle projects. Is there one, do you prioritize creating more mileage over making improvements to what we have existing, or should we focus on what we've got and bringing that up to a good standard?
I would say focus where there are the most pedestrians. The one on 27 seems important, because that's fairly densely built, whereas the Quaker Ridge Road, there's not much housing, and so it's more of a recreational type of walk.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a place, that's my 2 cents.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing as Jenny, that 27, that's so dangerous there. And very heavily trafficked.
But right now, if you think about it, there's no pedestrians out there. It's a build it and they will come idea.
So which side of
We're looking at working on the,
the
it would be the
lake
northbound
side?
side, it would be the lake side. Yes.
I think there's been some demographic changes there too, so part of this is a result of neighbors wanting to have better walking facilities because they have little kids. And my guess is like they're relatively new to the neighborhood, they moved in and they have little kids and they want to be able to walk to school. Whereas maybe some of the people moving out were older and, not that not everybody needs a sidewalk, but I think especially, I think when you have a little kid and you're close to the school and you can't walk to the school, it's really frustrating. So part of it is, I think it got on the agenda because we're hearing from residents who live there, who want to use it.
I would also say that if it saves us on the hazardous bus route, that would be, as much as I'd like to see improvements on Quaker, because it's like riding in a swamp or sand, or, I think Route 27 is a better road to go.
I think there's also a question in my mind with the Quaker road improvements is how far it goes, because I think right now it doesn't, go across that bridge. And, if it doesn't help you get to the shop, the shopping and stuff like that, and does it only go to Updike Farm, or I'm not sure.
No, it extends all the way to that parking lot.
Trolley
on-
track trail.
Right, and you can get onto the DNR Canal Trail from there at the south end.
But it is kind of recreational if that's the destination, so, I think I agree with the other members.
Okay.
I would say like, it's like you're really great at getting grant money. So to the degree that some of these are good candidates for that, I know there's like limited bandwidth too, so that needs to be factored in. But if we can leverage other money, that also makes it attractive to bump it up the.
27 definitely is a good candidate for that because typically with the bikeway funds, they want to see new mileage created. And we have not had opportunities like that in the past where we have open areas to create, so I would definitely seek a grant for that. But it is state highway, so we have to work with state highway. It's also historic, so we'll be working with HPC and SHPO on the improvements there as well.
And grant applications that are linked that hook up gaps in the system are also ranked higher, aren't they?
Definitely. So, okay, so that helps with prioritizing that. Then if you're looking like at, of course, this really probably is only falling in towards the end of my 6-year lookout, but if you're looking at different corridors that we want to focus on, so we've got Washington, we've got Harrison, and we've got the Wiggins corridor. Wiggins corridor, we've been working on a study that should be coming to council hopefully in October. Washington, obviously, we have had that fatality, and we have a lot of crossing activity with the university on both sides. And then we've got the Harrison corridor, which is also a piece of the bike master plan of looking at potentially putting in bike lanes, a road diet, various things. So is there any sense that we should be focusing on one corridor over another moving forward in like the next 6 years?
Well, I'm just gonna, I'll jump in. I mean, it seems like we've already started on Harrison, and so it seems like there's energy around that where we should finish looking at it and decide what we want to do.
Wiggins, sorry, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but Wiggins, correct?
Wiggins.
Okay,
Sorry, yeah.
Wiggins, Hamilton, I know.
That's what I meant,
Yes.
sorry, Wiggins.
It's okay.
Yeah, no, sorry. I was thinking Hamilton and.
That's okay, I've been doing that too.
All right,
don't worry.
and then Washington, there, I don't wanna freak everybody out, but there are plans to,
Close the bridge.
to redo the bridge on Washington once we're done with Alexander. The good news is that it's gonna be totally different because there's room there and it's not as constrained, so there's probably gonna be movement in both ways while they're doing the project. So it's gonna be a totally different kind of project that'll hopefully be much less disruptive. But it also seems like it makes sense to look at that while the state is in there, the county's in there doing what they're gonna do, as opposed to us doing a lot of investment in it and then.
And I think the university too, with the work that they're doing at the engineering quad, and moving things around and making east-west connectors, it would be a good time to coordinate those activities.
So, I'm sorry, I was a little bit distracted too. What kinds of issues are you thinking of looking at on Washington? Because right now it's not really used in a complete streets kind of way. I'm not sure what needs study there.
So, so to add into that is, it's also partially a county road. And I know at one point the university had suggested putting in buffer bike lanes on the county portion of Washington. I think it really could be a complete streets review of Washington and do we need to make improvements with crossings because we had the fatality and we have had serious injury accidents in that corridor. By Nassau, at Goheen, different, the different crosswalks, yes.
Yeah, all of Washington is a high accident area for pedestrians.
Yeah, it might be worth, for Washington in particular, a conversation with the university too about their timing and if they're willing to partner with some of the investment that it's going to take. Because a lot of the investment in safety, it goes through campus, right? And
So we had a quarterly meeting with staff and we just held it, I think, last week. And it was a topic of conversation with them, that it is something we would like to look at in conjunction with them and their improvements.
We were also looking at the HSIP grant on Washington, right?
Right.
It's a federal grant that helps with safety improvements. Then we have fatalities and accidents and stuff like that. So it could be looked into that manner also.
That's more of a competitive grant, just so you know. So this is the HSIP, it's the Highway Safety Improvement Plan, I think. And we actually, in a way, our project, a municipal project would compete with a county project to be put on the list. So we actually have to work too with the county so that they would support our application of the project. But, it can be done, it's just putting it out there that it's not a slam dunk like some of our other grants like that.
Is Harrison also one of the corridors that you're thinking
That was
about?
one that I brought up because I did, the bike advisory committee had also brought that up as something that they were interested in having further attention given to. But that's where I wanted to say, well, we've got the Wiggins corridor, we've got Washington, Harrison's added into the mix, what's the priority ranking?
It seems to me that in terms of Harrison, like there are alternatives nearby, easily accessible, like Broadmeter or Fritz Randolph that are very low, low stress streets. Whereas from Washington, you have to go actually quite a lot further to find an alternative street that runs the same way.
But there's all you can just go through campus. There's so many options
Yeah.
through campus. And
Yeah.
I think, Harrison, speaking on behalf of the Bike Advisory Committee, is the only, it's really north-south connector that takes you right through town, all the way from Route 1 to the north end of town. And so, right to 206. And I think we're looking at a lot of development happening around the shopping center, and we've had fatalities at the shopping center too. And I think that the facilities are a lot, they're not, they're more confusing, I guess I would say. With turn lanes and sort of striped areas the cars aren't supposed to go in, to figure out how to navigate that on a bicycle for sure is a lot harder than figuring out what you're supposed to do on Washington Road. Washington's narrow and, it's a little scary, I guess, for people, but.
Are each of these projects, like when you think of them, like 2-year projects, 3-year projects? So for example, like Wiggins, I mean, we've started that already, but it's like if we complete that, do you see that ending at the end of next year, or is it a longer term project than that?
I see that would be a 2-year project. And I think a big part of it's gonna be the stakeholder conversations related to that. Because we do have, the goal of the corridor study is to come out with a recommendation. But again, it's a conceptual plan. And until you get into the meat of surveying where everybody's property lines are and their trees and this development and that development is, we're doing as much as we can during the concept phase, but more of that comes out in preliminary design. And that's where you have the tough conversations about what the improvements might look like.
It seems like some of it's somewhat dependent on the timing of Washington, especially if the university is going to be a partner on that. Then is there time in between time in between Wiggins and Washington to squeeze in Harrison, or does it make sense to put it at the end? I mean, I think you've made the case that all are important to do, and it's just,
Okay, well, again, it's gonna be, part of the 6-year plan is not necessarily this next year. And so we can revisit it next year. But at least it kind of elevates the corridors that we're looking
I
at from
just
the
have,
engineering side.
another word to say about Washington, which is that certainly the pedestrian considerations close in town are important, but, once you get past the river or whatever, canal, it's sort of a, bike path to nowhere kind of thing, because the Route 1 crossing at Washington is so difficult. And, there's been conversation actually about getting a bike path across University land to Fisher Place, where there's another light, which would be a much safer crossing. And, with the university's master plan for that pedestrian, bike walk,
and crossing.
great.
So,
Yeah, so I just think that Washington Road is going to have much different demands on it in 10 years. And it might be misguided to spend a whole lot of time doing upgrades that address the current needs there, when they're not going to be the same in the not distant future. So.
Yeah, maybe the idea is to hold off until that flyover bridge comes to fruition and see how that changes travel patterns and demands.
and the new bridge too.
Right, that's what it is, a flyover bridge, right?
Well, there's 2, and if they're going to redo the road bridge.
Yes,
also.
the Harrison Bridge, the Washington Bridge, right?
If we could go back and talk about the Nassau Street
Yes.
And so, how do you think about that when you have a plan, that's conceptual plan, and is there, do you set money aside each year, or do you want that direction from council as to, we want you to do $1 million worth of this over the next 3 years or 4 years, or how are you thinking about that?
So I have set aside money every year for the last couple of years. We're using a portion of it next year with the Bank Street project. What we did is we rolled in the first installment of the Nassau Streetscape improvements from 206 to Bank Street. And so that'll be the first installation of the new sidewalk and looking at all of the other aesthetic improvements. Part of our survey contract that we're looking to put out this next month is to survey the rest of the sidewalk corridor within that streetscape area start creating projects within that. I know we've talked about, I think it was at the Public Works meeting, about just going in right now and starting to replant trees, which we can do. I've worked with Taylor Secluder, we've met with DOT to look at what the different options are to get that done. We can either work with them through a Good Neighbor program, but the funding and the timing is not necessarily guaranteed and readily like trackable. So the other alternative is for us to just budget and get the highway occupancy permits and start making the improvements ourselves. So I think if we want to see quick turnaround on things, that's the way we should go. So what I'm currently thinking is that we would work with Taylor to start replanting. And he and I just talked about it today, that we can replant in some of our tree pits. We don't have to create new tree pits. So that would be one thing that we would look to do right away. We also have our flagship bus shelter that we're looking to build. And that begged the question for us of, well, do we just repair the concrete around the new flagship bus shelter, or do we take a little more time and do, say, a block of the streetscape from Palmer Square to Witherspoon Street?
Yes.
And I think that makes more sense to do is, yes, it's gonna delay the bus shelter, but then we can just amend our permit that we have now to show the improvements of that block. So then you have the block from Palmer Square back to Bank Street. You know, it seems to make sense that we then try to maybe pull that in as well with the bus shelter improvement. So we're now just kind of working together to put the pieces together. And I can't say how much things are going to cost, but once we have the survey done, we start looking at what the design entails, we can start putting money towards projects. But we do have money, like I said, from previous years. We're not using all of it for Bank Street. I put additional money in for this. I put $500,000 in for this year. So presumably then that can go for the piece from Bank Street to Witherspoon Street. And that's kind of the idea of what we're thinking about. And then we would move from Witherspoon Street and keep moving east from there.
How far east is the streetscape program going to go?
It goes to more.
And so what you were just talking about a few minutes ago, are you thinking about doing some interim tree plantings while the whole thing's being, because it is, we do have a lot of empty tree pits and dying trees. so
Correct,
that would-
Yeah, it would be great.
Okay.
Correct, and with the new streetscape sidewalk layout that we've chosen, we don't have to worry about the diamond pattern being cut off and because it will all fit together because we have rectangular and square sections of sidewalk going forward.
Has that all been engineered already, the design all the way through?
It has not,
Can we be a
no.
part of that? Can I be a part of that?
Of course,
I'd really love to see, how that's going to be.
definitely.
So the first part of it was within Bank Street project. So once that project goes out, we get an estimate of how much it's gonna cost us to score that type of pattern. And that, I think, will help us to budget it in further years, like how many blocks of sidewalk we can do.
Yeah.
The majority of the improvements will be for ADA compliances, because you have to have that ADA compliant.
How about like green infrastructure design? I mean, is going to be continuous tree planting on it? Like how much are we going to accommodate the trees so they do better than they have in the past?
And that's where, so Taylor and I have started a conversation about that. I haven't dumped all of that on him yet. I mean, he's very forward thinking and he's definitely into like enlarging tree pits, amending soils. I haven't broached the subject of We may have talked about connecting all of the tree pits
Right,
underground.
capturing runoff.
Right, and we talked about
Drought
lowering the trees in the tree pits so that they can capture runoff.
But we're also talking about doing species of trees that are large for root shade, because that's a huge sidewalk along that
Yes.
side, which is really
Yes, but they also have to be conducive for that type of environment that they're gonna be in. So yeah, no, he has a list, our previous arborist had a list of trees. He has further gone into that list and has made some changes.
Well, we're also coordinating, I know we're doing that from Nassau, I guess, to Green Street on Witherspoon.
Mm-hmm.
We wouldn't want to be closing sidewalks there, doing construction at the same time we're doing that stretch of Nassau,
Correct.
right? So,
Right, and that same idea of the streetscape would continue down Witherspoon Street as well. But I just wanted that brought up. Witherspoon Street on that project, I also want to point out that we're looking at making improvements to Heinz Plaza and around the library, because we do have a lot of sidewalk issues. So we would roll that into the same construction project.
And there's a plaza treatment, because the streetscape plan spoke to, I think there were smaller plazas,
Mhm.
but would it be that same treatment then? Or could that be a different treatment there?
We'll see. I'm gonna work with Michael and we're gonna launch a design charrette program to really decide what the neighborhood and the community wants to see for the Witherspoon corridor as well as the Heinz Plaza area.
and talking about that corridor, I was thinking when going beyond, or north, I guess, of like Green Street, that sections of Witherspoon may be eligible for CDBG monies as we set up that program, because it's an income eligible part of the town. So
Right.
that might be able to be a way to continue that corridor.
That would be great, because our design charrette's gonna reach all the way down here to Valley. But our first installment of construction will only go to Green Street. So
That's what's-
that would be a great opportunity
Yeah.
to jump on those
I'm thinking
funds.
it's probably
I was gonna say, Mike, for the sake of the public, may want to explain what that money
Oh, I'm
is.
sorry, Community Development Block Grant program. Now that Princeton is setting up a program to directly receive CDBG funds, sorry for the jargon. It's based on, you can only do improvements in areas of municipality that are income eligible as determined by the federal government. And I'm guessing Witherspoon might be a good place for this kind of funding.
And Princeton recently qualified for it, so it's a significant amount of money every year.
It's over $200,000
$200,000 a
estimated
year.
now, maybe more. So it'll begin in July of 2020. We'll go through a process of putting an application together.
I had another question too, just about your budgeting, where you were saying that there were maintenance projects that you had under capital budget, which CFAC has talked on and off about wanting to move away from that and to treat maintenance projects as going in operational budget instead of capital. And have you sort of gone through that exercise of thinking about how to make that transition, or what would that transition mean?
I may defer that one to Mark.
Her budget is probably not a good budget because of the size. Her maintenance activities aren't smaller maintenance activities. There are other departments that are probably more right for the type of things that you're talking about.
Right.
And as we go through the capital budget, we can identify some of those things. But the big issue with moving it is just a matter of the impact on the operational budget,
Right.
and how much it increases.
Right. And then, I'm not sure how much of this goes on now, but we used to have a fairly large in-house repaving program. How much of that is done in-house of the repaving and how much is getting contracted out?
Very, very little. We don't have a paving machine. We have shared a machine with Lawrence. And then I think it needed work and then they sold it. Something to that effect. So no, we really don't do paving. We've gone back and forth having conversations about, does it make sense to invest in the equipment needed to do the work? And I think really at the prioritization of what is put on DPW at this point, it doesn't seem like it makes sense to add that into the mix. That it's a big capital investment, and we really don't have the time and the staff to put towards it. Right.
And that's one of the things you have to look at when you look at the in-house versus having a contractor do it, is really do the cost-benefit analysis. There's the capital costs that we're going to have to deal with, but more importantly, these are man-intensive, women-intensive
People.
intensive activities. So if you do these jobs, you have to do them in a short period of time with a lot of personnel. And what that does is, based on our current employees that we have, it really would pull them away. And so we have to do that analysis to see whether it really makes sense financially, or does going out for the contract really make the most sense, and is it more efficient? Sometimes it's more efficient for us to just figure out what are all the different roads we want to do that are smaller jobs. Do a contract. Contractor can bring in 5 or 6 crews, get it done in a couple of days, versus us going from spot to spot to spot on a very kind of sporadic timeline. So that's where we have to do that analysis. Our initial things, it may not work, but we can do the analysis to find out whether it makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, there might be portions of it. I mean, we've talked about like crack sealing. That's one of those things, those first touches to a road, say within 3 to 5 years of it being resurfaced. Maybe that's something that, you know, they can just rent a machine and go take care of that. And you know, that would go a long way to help keep our roads together. So we're continuing to have that dialogue as to, are there pieces that can kind of be put on them versus what we contract
That
out.
also applies to potholes.
Well, they do the potholes,
Oh, they
yeah.
are doing potholes.
But we
Okay.
have had conversations of, is there a different way to do potholes that will stabilize them so they don't become something bigger? And so, again, it's back to that resources, cost benefit analysis.
I just have a follow-up question on the Nassau Witherspoon. I know we're gonna meet and talk more about Nassau soon, I can't wait. But if you look at, what is the time span that you see? Are we talking 5, 10, 15 years? Just a ballpark figure, and I'm not gonna hold you to it.
I would hope 5 years.
5 years. Okay, good.
I would
It's
hope
really
it wasn't
don't-
10 years.
Considering we don't find anything underground that
Exactly.
that
Is
is
an
opposed
impediment.
to any of the green infrastructure
Right,
installation
right,
and stuff like that. so.
Okay, okay, that's helpful. And then I have a totally unrelated question, which may not even really fall under your department, which is, I didn't see anything in the capital budget, and maybe it doesn't belong there, about GIS, Geographic Information Systems, and I know I talked about this a little bit with some of you. It's something that I think we really should be doing. So where does that go if we're moving ahead with that? Is that in your department? Is that in?
Quite frankly, what you're going to see in terms of GIS, you probably won't see that in capital. What council's going to have to make a decision on. The next decision is really more personnel costs. In terms of, because we have the software, it's really going to be a personnel cost, which will be in the 2020 budget.
It is here somewhere, but I saw it.
I didn't see it, but I missed it.
We used to have it in our capital budget. I think this was the first year I took it out, obviously because it was a choice of all of my other project costs that were involved. Yeah.
Are there any other questions for Deanna? Thank you for kicking this off, and it was really useful and informative, so thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate this forum. It's great to be able to talk about the different priorities and what's, you know, under our purview.
I'd like to thank you and Mark for getting grant money, so it reduces money for a municipal conference.
All right, so next is Public Works, and
No, together. Start doing that more.
I turn it over to Dan.
Actually, I'm going to.
Oh, Mark, okay.
So we're going to talk about next is Public Works. As you know, it's not called, it's actually infrastructure and operations. So we're going to kind of walk through infrastructure and operations. And one of the issues, we're going to give you an idea of what's going on now, but one of the key issues, as you know, there is not a director of this department at this time. So that's one of the key issues, and a lot of things that we talk about will change as we recruit a new director of the department.
Looking at Dan's nameplate, I thought he got a promotion.
Not that I'm aware of.
I said public works. I thought he said director of public works. Yeah, administrative.
First, let's just talk about the operational side. Public work, infrastructure and operations has a number of different divisions. There's parking operation, which includes both Spring Street and all the meters. Then there is the park and open space maintenance. A lot of these activities are mowing of different areas that are outside the contract. There's different parts of town where there are areas that are not covered under our mowing contract, which is done by recreation, that Public Works carries. In addition, there are other small patches of land where they do the maintenance, and then various other maintenance in the open space areas. That's just something jump in. And next we have public buildings, and really the maintenance of all of the public buildings are responsible for all the custodial services. We just moved into a contract to do the custodial service in-house. It's been working very well so far. The repair, kind of a lot of the major minor repairs to the buildings, all the public buildings and improvements are done through Public Works. Tree maintenance and removal, and we'll talk a little bit later about those. Sign and the compost center. When I say the compost center, is referring to the Lawrence facility that we have. We do the shared service with Lawrence. Then there's the sanitary and sewer operations, and that's all of the sanitary systems, such as leaf and brush. And then municipal waste, which is a big topic we'll talk a little bit about a little later. Vehicle repair, maintenance, and acquisition. And then there's finally the road maintenance, which are mostly the potholes. And one of the big ones that's a driver that most people don't, and we'll talk about a little bit as we go through this, don't recognize this, particularly when we look at our capital budget, is snow removal. And that's really the cost of vehicles and what we need to actually make snow operations actually work. Looking forward in 2020, there are some things that we're currently working on that we will be working on, continue to work on in 2020. Though the parking system changes, a lot of those have to do with just continuing the system improvements. Then one project was the review of the municipal building, and that's Monument Hall, to review that facility and could there be additional use. One idea that was thrown out was the hotel. That has been on hold with the director no longer here. That's on hold, so that process will be restarted. In addition, there will be the review of the solid waste removal, and that's our refuge collection program, trash. We're going out for bid as we speak for a contract. What we've gone out for, I think it's just a one-year contract that we have with extensions to go.
Two one-year extensions.
2 one-year extensions. But in the interim, what we will be doing is doing an evaluation of the program to see if does it make sense for us to do it in-house or not. So we'll be doing that evaluation over the next year. And by the time we have the next extension, we'll make a determination. We'll come to council and make a determination where do we go from here. The next is the River Road cold storage. That is currently the current status of that. The plans have been completed. It was scheduled earlier this summer to go out for bid. Unfortunately, with the change in the department, that did not happen. The big issues to be determined there is really bringing utilities out to the site that needs to be resolved, and then that should be ready. The architect's already prepared all the plans for the cold storage facility. Then we have the John Street improvements. That's the public works facilities on John Street. The architect is working on a design. That is particularly of importance, particularly now with the SOC kind of employees being at the SOC no longer being the case. Those employees were moved to John Street. That's created a situation we now have John Street where it is overcrowded. We do need to make the improvements in that facility to ensure that there's enough space for the employees. It is very crowded right now. They're in trailers as we speak, and we really do need to make those improvements. So that is a top priority to have that done. In terms of looking forward to other big things, the River Road cleanup. As you know, the site the situation with the dumping on the site, we're going to have to do the cleanup of that site. We're waiting on the test results. When those get back, there'll be a remediation plan. Based on that remediation plan, we'll have to coordinate the cleanup of that site. In addition to that, there is the River Road landfill. On the landfill, each year there's a review of the landfill. Over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of erosion because of drainage which goes across the landfill. That can't happen. So what if you recall, maybe a month ago or so, there was a contract before council for T&M to do a design that would implement a drainage system on the site to improve the current drainage system and allow the water to drain through the site. That will have to be a capital project in this year's budget. That actually isn't on your sheet, but we should be looking at, and I'm guessing, it's a complete guess, a couple of $100,000 project to make that happen. That's something that we will have to address. We don't have a price yet. We're still in the design phase of that. One of the other major projects is on just the reorganization, and Deanna spoke about that just a little bit. One of the things that we want to do with Public Works and Engineering is really look at where are the synergies. Right now, as you may be aware, Public Works for the design of, the SOC is sewer operating. Design of the roads are done in engineering, and then SOC does the sewer. Quite frankly, it makes sense for those two operations to be together. We're now in discussions with staff and putting something together in terms of where is the right place for that to really sit. And I think all of the infrastructure operations, it kind of makes sense to be in engineering. So we're talking in terms of, we'll come back to council with some how we see reorganization of that facility. Really having Public Works deal with what I see Public Works is really maintenance of our facilities and kind of operational, and really have engineering do the design and the construction and management of the construction. The next issue we have is the food waste program. Actually, on Monday night, we'll have a presentation with some suggestions on that, so stay tuned. And then this week we're having our kickoff meeting with the Board of Education for shared services. One of the areas of particular areas we're going to be looking at is Public Works facilities. So there may be from that study some implementation plans that we may need to do, and I see that some 2020 areas. If you change up, we're going to go to the.
Can we have questions on
Sure, absolutely.
infrastructure and operations before we move to IT? Was thought given to holding back on replacing the director's position until after the shared services study is done? I think that we're looking for synergies between the schools where we want to avoid duplication of position or possible shared position. I would note too that Mr. Van Matter is Director of Public Works, correct?
Yes.
That's his title, Director of Infrastructure and Operations. Was there thought given to that? I know. I know when we did the Assistant Administrator that we combined that with the Health Officer.
There was initial thought. However, in looking at the operations, based on our current needs, I really do think we need to move forward with getting a Public Works, infrastructure and operations, which is probably going to change. Someone there to actually manage that operation is my recommendation that we move forward with that. Because there are a lot of things that there needs to be someone there to kind of deal with. And it's kind of a critical position. I don't want to wait.
So what would be some examples of what would need to be done, of what they would be doing now?
Quite frankly, all of the, right now,
Solid
with
waste
the solid waste stuff that we have, all of the food waste program, the landfill drainage issues, managing these projects in terms of the John Street improvements, the River Road, cold storage, all of these things here, you really know. What we have now is we're actually working well because the Director of Public Works does a great job, and that's really operationally getting the guys moving, getting their jobs done. But we really do need the support of a director of infrastructure really to manage the entire operations.
Open space
There's
also.
parking, there's open space, so there's a lot of operations that right now aren't necessarily being managed, that we really should grab a hold of.
And I'm not sure if this is the correct, best form for this, but it's sort of like a hybrid question, comment. I mean, all this planning will, of course, is keeping in mind, basically doing what we need to do to avoid a repeat of the malfeasance that occurred.
Correct, absolutely.
Right.
Okay. I have two questions. One was, when you talk about the drainage problem, it's really under the solar farm. And is it caused by the solar farm? Drainage problems, I don't think we had it before the solar farm, did we?
We did.
We did.
It's been for years. There's basically, through the landfill, there's actually, on one side there's wetlands, and the wetlands drains right through the middle
Okay.
of the landfill.
Okay, so I was just wondering what,
There are two issues. There's some issues that were related to the solar farm. That's the responsibility of the solar company, where that's on erosion based on that.
okay.
This is actually a different issue
Okay.
that's been.
I just want to make sure we're getting the most we can out of them. Okay, and the other question is that you mentioned really quickly a review of Monument Hall and changing it to a hotel, which I've always been interested in, as you know. And see, I didn't know that was being discussed. And is there a kind of council member involved? And how?
It's
what
one of, it's
are
actually
you
one of
talking
your,
about?
it's one of your priorities.
So, yes, I can back up a little bit on that. So the first step is to have a realistic assessment, both of this building and of Monument Hall, as to the space needs. Because it's not just like you sum up how much space there is at Monument Hall and that's what we would need to create.
No, understood.
Because just people were put in there just because that was available. So having a better understanding, and then also, are there ways maybe to reconfigure this building too? So it's doing that background research of just what's the baseline, what are the baseline needs?
So what exact plan is there for that to happen right now?
Well, I think they're going through and like looking at who's in.
Oh, someone's doing
No,
that on
they
staff?
aren't right now. That's what I said, right? That was part of what the director was doing. With him leaving, that's why I said this has been on hold. We need to bring that, we're gonna have to bring that back forward to start working on that. That has not been worked on since the director left.
Okay.
But I would think it'd be wise to get a space planning consultant to do that. I mean, I don't know exactly what Bob's training was, but to really be able to identify space needs and stuff like that as a strategy. Sure.
Maybe it's something we want to talk to, maybe it's a possibility for shared service to the district, that they have somebody coming in. I don't know, I don't really have a sense of how big a project that is, but maybe it's a way to tack on to somebody who's already familiar, looking at the community, and is in town already.
At the very first, like, maybe you could give the council even just a list of everyone that's in the building and how many rooms there are and how many employees there are in each room. Like, it seems like some of it isn't super complicated and others, I mean, like, I don't even know how many employees are there, because when I go there, it looks kind of empty. So I don't know if that seems useful, but
It's not complicated, but if
It
you
is.
don't have the information of the size of the different rooms and stuff like that, there's a lot of legwork of measuring spaces.
no, understood.
Yeah.
Michael, did you want to say?
Yeah, I was just gonna mention, I was gonna bring this up during planning if you wanted. I
Okay,
think I have some ideas about it.
okay,
We'll put a pin in that.
okay.
Did you have more questions, Jen?
No.
Okay.
I have a bunch of things. So one thing that I'm really concerned about and would really like more information on is, you know, our waste stream is composed of, right, we have our garbage, we have our recycling, and then we have our leaves and brush. And I'd really love to see some data on what it's cost, what the current system, which I just don't think is working, is costing
brush?
us. The leaves and brush in particular, because, you know, for garbage, we have a contract with a hauler. And for recycling, we pay the county, whatever. So those are fairly easy. But the leaves and brush, I mean, you go throughout town, there's leaves and brush all over the place. It's a hazard for bicyclists. it's a hazard for cars, because who knows, sometimes you have to go through them, and who knows what's there. And then this stuff gets into the sewers, as you know, the sustainable Princeton folks have been, or adopt a storm drain. But if we could get a lot of that stuff off the street. So I'd love to see a real breakdown in what that's costing us and what some alternatives are. And I know one person has suggested that we move to larger containers and purchase a tipper, I think it's called a tipper, that hooks onto a truck that allows you to pick up these big containers and dump them into the truck. And the number that was mentioned to me that I think Bob Huff had come up with was about $5,000, which doesn't seem like a large expense. And then you can start encouraging people to move towards these larger containers that they can, forget about bagging leaves, forget about putting stuff on the street. And I know this isn't going to work for the tree streets or Witherspoon Jackson, but it will work for a lot of areas. And then I know this is kind of a heretical idea, but I really don't think if you have a couple of acres that you should be putting your leaves and brush on the street for us to pick up. So I'd like to see what kind of policies we can come up with to, discriminate between people that have smaller properties and people that have larger properties in terms of dealing with leaves and brush, because both for the cost to the town and the ecological reasons, it doesn't make sense.
So I would recommend for that be something that comes back as part of that priority setting, where we discuss it.
Sounds like we have a recruit to fill one of the openings on public works next year too.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyway, I got into this because, again, I think it's called a tipper, even though it's not very much money, but it is a thing that one buys, so I thought that might fit into that
But the
capital
plastic
budget.
bins are also a huge, all the plastic bins you have to buy for everyone. That's a humongous amount of money.
Right, well, that would be up to, I think, individuals to purchase, and, perhaps the town could arrange to get them at cost, and people then, we'd have to look into that.
We
But-
did look into this, by the way, I'll tell you.
Okay, all right, we can talk. A couple other
Every 2
things.
years now.
So again, I'm not, maybe this, okay, one thing I'm gonna say for the IT. So we are budgeting a lot of money to remove trees, and I know we have the emerald ash borer, and that is a big and unanticipated expense a few years ago. But we're budgeting just a tiny fraction of the amount of money that we're spending to remove trees, to plant trees. And I'm wondering, if there's anything we can do, because there are so many, not aesthetic, although there are aesthetic reasons, but there are really important environmental reasons, I think.
Where are you looking at
The EAB under parks. There's-
$350,000
So,
allocated.
and just,
for-
so if I could tack my question on to Councilwoman Niedergang's, we expect that all EAB affected trees will be out of the right of way by 2023 then, since
No.
we stopped funding
What
for
we,
removal
no, we stopped funding for the removal.
in
Actually,
2022?
We've, for the last 3 years, we funded $300,000 for the last 3 years. We haven't spent that money yet. So that's why we took the kind of the gap years. There's still money in previous year's budgets.
So it's on page 6 of 8, under infrastructure parks, ash tree removal and or treatment. So we've been spending $350 a year.
We haven't been spending, we've been
Budgets. We
budgeting
have-
$350, not spending it, so that's why we're skipping a year, because we have funds still left.
So we're skipping and then we're doing 2 years and then we don't have any projections for 23, 24, 25? That's correct, because those lines are blank.
I would have to look and see why those are blank.
I'm sorry,
No, no, no,
piggybacked off
but,
your.
yeah, so, yeah, okay, that's a good point, I didn't pick that up. But anyway, so, I obviously defer to the arborist and public works on that, but I'm wondering if, more money can be spent on planting. And the final question I have relating to this is really an open space question. And again, this might be a question out of ignorance, but the open space budget is not included in the capital budget, so any possible purchases or anything like that would not be listed.
Usually on the open space acquisition, they're a matter of when we find them, we go after them. Usually don't see them unless we know we have one at hand. But if it does come up, it's usually something we can amend the capital budget. But if we know one, we'll put it in there. At this time, we don't have any open acquisitions that we can put into the budget. And just to go back to talk about the plantings, we could spend more. One of the reasons why it's so much of a difference is just the cost of the tree removal is very expensive.
Yeah, they're good trees.
And again, that can be a discussion we could bring back to either the arborist in terms of what makes sense, because he would have an idea of what makes sense in terms of how many trees can be planted in a year, what makes sense. But we that takes.
Has Princeton had like a working ratio of replacement, like how many trees come down, how many gets replanted, or just
I'm not sure.
sometimes they'll have
It's
one
supposed to
tree
be
down,
one
yeah.
tree.
Well, it depends on the size of the tree that came down, actually, that's in the current
Yeah.
ordinance.
So, and just a quick end to that, which is, that, I know that, Parks and Rec are together, and I think that, the rec fields, I think, are well-maintained and well-funded. From many people who use the parks, I hear continuous complaints about how the parks are not maintained in the way they should be. Again, this is not really a capital budget issue, but I don't know if it makes sense to break out Parks and Rec and have somebody running parks who's, really focused on that, if that is something that might be considered as we bring in a new director of infrastructure and operations, but.
Can I ask the question just a slightly different way? So I see Mark out in the audience, and I want to thank Mark for his service many years ago with the Transition Task Force, and you headed the Infrastructure and Operations Group, right? And there was a lot of discussion at the time about what's the right size for the department, and I know we've had a lot of discussion in terms of police about right-sizing the force, but I think there's still a question hanging out there as to, is Public Works the right size? And, do we need more employees to get the service levels that people are expecting? And I don't know if this is the right forum to talk about that, but I think that my sense is there's an interest and concern from council that we have the right size of the department that can answer to what the expectation is and what the hopes are for what it should deliver. And it's I think there's always going to be that tension if there's an expectation and we're not funding enough positions to do the work.
One of the other things that's to be clear in terms of the maintenance of the parks, and that's right, and I think that's a conversation we should kind of have in terms of what those expectations are. I don't know if this is the right time we brought it up, we can kind of go deeper on that question. In terms of the right size, what's the right size? It's a matter of if council identifies where there's areas where they want additional, they see where there's a service level that's not acceptable, we should identify that, and that's how we'll make adjustments.
Will we get to that through the shared services study?
Some of that's going to be, some of it may.
So right now, we're working off a strategic plan that was done in 2016 for Public Works, is that correct? And now we're 3 years later looking at how can we share some of the same services in this area and in other areas with the schools. So I had a question that was related to vehicle purchase too, that, should we go ahead with a couple million or $3 or $4 million of vehicles that we're going to be bonding for in 20 until after we're Can we see whether the schools have the same stuff that we might be able to share?
It's actually, what I can say, particularly on
I'm
the
sorry,
vehicles-
it's like a lot to be.
Particularly on the vehicles.
You're the
that's one-
director now of infrastructure and operations.
And we've had a lot of conversation about it, particularly when the vehicles, a number of the vehicles that are being proposed in this are dumps. And therefore, most of particularly for the snow removal. And they are 2008,
2005.
2005 is a dump
2008.
truck.
So they're in very, very old, really need to be replaced. And they're in critical positions where we need to have them for our snow removal. So I think delaying some of those, I mean, we can look and see what the right number is, but I don't think in delaying all of those vehicles would
Not
be
all of
appropriate.
them, but it seems that there are some on this list that are, and again, I'm not driving them every day, so it seems to me that that maybe we need to differentiate between what we need right away and what they might have across the street that.
Well, we have 2 dump trucks that were auctioned off already, and then we have 3 that are 2005s. And this year and last year, 2018, the dump trucks got taken out of the budget. And then this year, mistakenly, they weren't put in the budget. So we've been 2 years without any dump trucks. And we've had 2 that are gone, auctioned off, and one of the 2005s, we couldn't put on the road this year because it was just in such disrepair.
I just,
Jenny and then David.
oh, sorry. I wanted to just back up what Eve said about the trees, because I've always been concerned about the rate of trees since I've been on the council. I felt like we weren't replacing the trees at the, just seems like we're losing trees every year.
Well, we do about 50 trees in the spring and 50 again in the fall.
Yeah, I know. I don't think it's enough.
I think we're cutting back 350 ash trees, I think.
Well, that's-
This year.
That's different. I mean,
They're not
the
street
regular
trees,
tree
they're not
replacement,
street trees,
yeah,
yeah.
street tree
Sorry.
replacement is
Yeah.
different than the ash.
I think what you're getting to is a dramatic net loss of trees
Yeah.
in Princeton overall, so just so we.
Well, even just because we lost, we had a horrible storm a couple years ago where we lost so many huge trees, and then Nassau Street looks horrible, so.
Those overs are kind of dying.
David?
Yeah, I'm just going back to the question about how to get at the question of the right size of public works. I know that CPAC has been doing some benchmarking relative to other communities, and that's another way to come at the issue. Obviously, you can look at it from various directions, but if we're looking both at money and at staffing, but if we've got a public works department that's already a third bigger than comparable communities, then it's probably not a problem of understaffing, but of something else if we're not getting the work done that needs to be done.
Any other questions about public works or infrastructure and operations?
I was gonna say, that's a good point, David, but we also have to consider that we may provide better services than some of the communities.
It's possible, but I think that this
Well, we have to-
the
right,
discussion here was that we're not getting the job done.
Right.
So it's better services and we're still not getting the job done, that's one
Well,
thing.
that would be different, yeah.
But I think there's other
We need to
things.
keep that in the equation.
I do want to say this, there's other things to keep in mind too, and it's a matter of what job is more important too, and where do we want to focus. I think that's something else that we, in terms of just input to staff, is where should the focus be? It may just be that we're working on other issues and not the issues, those appropriate issues, so it's important also to get that done.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, the staff works incredibly hard too, and so I just want to make sure, like, people are watching this, and we're really appreciative of the service, and they have some of the hardest jobs in this town, and they do a really great job, and, they just saved this town so many times with storms and doing an awesome job with that. I think when we were looking at, like, going back to leaf and brush, it's like, that is very staff intensive. And a lot of the neighboring communities might do one pickup, or 2 pickups all year. And so that might be an area where we as a community are spending significantly more than that, and maybe it's because that's a service that we want. But I think we have to understand, and maybe I want to sort of translate this conversation because I don't want it to be interpreted haywire. It's just, I think council wants to understand a little bit more deeply, and I think CFAC is going to help with this, like how do we compare with some of the other services provided in other communities? What are we spending that's maybe different? And just making sure we're being intentional about that. And maybe there's areas where we're not providing the same amount of service and we want to be, and maybe we need to either shift things around or make additional investments.
And I think, just want to find out the reverse, and I think Leaf and Brush is a good example of that. Where we're providing services that we shouldn't be providing, and we can save the money and allocate it to, getting Nassau Street done, or Witherspoon Street done, or lowering our taxes, or things like that, rather than picking up brush, a dozen times a year, or whatever, et cetera.
I just want to say, and that's a great example. Leaf and brush, when that season, pretty much, he's got all of his crews out doing leaf and brush. There's nothing else really getting done when there's leaf and brush, just because of the intense nature of it. So that is an area that if we look at, that's significant time that can be released.
And we just want to be intentional about it
Yes,
too,
absolutely,
right?
that's why we need the data on what is it costing us and what are the alternatives, and that isn't the information I've seen, maybe it's available, but I personally.
Well, and I think maybe we want to ask the question in a way it can be answered too. So maybe it's not how much does it cost dollar-wise, where you're having to figure out a piece of machinery, and percentage-wise, how many times is it on the road and what's the gas. It's more just staff time, I think, is a large question. It's and that I think should be easier to generate but again, I feel like I want to be careful that this meeting is not I don't think this is the data that should come back to full council right now, but something that we want to pass to Public Works, that the Public Works Committee, that there's interest and concerns about, how do we want to say, where are the resources being allocated within Public Works, working together with that report that CFAC is doing about comparable towns, and making sure that both the department's right-sized and that the allocation of resources is intentional.
I just add one more thing on the vehicles. No doubt about the larger piece of the dump trucks and stuff, but I'm assuming that as we buy smaller, like the pickup truck and below, that we're working with Sustainable Princeton on EV alternatives to those vehicles and the sharing of vehicles by staff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just want to let you know, I texted Taylor, and he said we do have a 5-year community forestry plan that allocates 100 trees a year for the next 5 years for replanting, but he said he's going to exceed all of that. So.
Okay, great, all right, thank you. All right, so move on to IT.
All right, so thank you. So I guess a little bit of background. 6 months ago, a new IT coordinator was hired, Terrence Morgan, and 4 months ago, new IT tech was hired, Mark Pazza. They've been reporting into administration the last 6 months. Previous to that, we had R&D Consulting providing some interim work for the municipality as we try to hire new staff for the department. So there's obviously been significant changes in that department in the last 14 months or so. Tonight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to review a little bit of the 5 to 6 year outlook, capital plan, and then work into the 2019 and 2020 operational projects. So looking at the capital budget for IT, the majority of these budget requests and expenditures cover routine maintenance and replacement of devices and hardware that have a predictable life expectancy. The devices' life expectancy is typically based upon the length of time the manufacturer will warranty the item, either service the item, or the length of time the software is made available for that particular device. So these are your service, your networks, servers, your network switches, things like that. Also police radios, computers, cellular modems, security cameras. So the 2020 proposed capital budget has been reworked from years past to focus on items that may live beyond their scheduled life expectancy, and then reassess their performance every year to try to squeeze as much life out of those items before purchasing new items or new devices. The major capital issues looking ahead 2 to 3 years include the replacement of network switches, server upgrades, and then replacement of security cameras and software for municipal properties. The tasks are going to be accomplished through a team effort of the internal IT staff, shared service agreement for network services with Princeton Public Schools, Princeton Public Library, and our part-time contractual agreement with R&D Consulting, which goes through the end of 2019. Looking at 2020, there's 5 primary operation projects, which some of you are probably familiar with, and they'll have significant impacts to budget and staff time for IT. These include the upgrade of municipal PCs from Windows 7 to Windows 10, assessment of municipal software inventory, meeting room audio-visual upgrades, GIS technical support, there you go, Eve, and cybersecurity infrastructure and training. So looking at the software support for Windows 7, Windows 7 becomes obsolete at the end of 2019, and therefore new software, new hardware with the most recent operating platform of Windows 10 will be required for the continued support and security. Reassessment of our largest budget drivers, the software inventory, will be a first or second priority, second quarter goal for 2020, a major priority. We're going to try to aim to combine similar softwares amongst departments where possible. We've seen some potential with departments that utilize it for inspection software. So for instance, the building department, the health department, fire safety, there is some similarities there. And there are vendors out there that offer kind of a one-stop shop for all, which will save quite a bit of money for the operational budget. As Joseph Council is aware, the main meeting room suffered some audio and visual recording issues recently. Through the end of 2019 and into 2020, IT hopes to upgrade the operating hardware in the control room, which, believe it or not, is already out of date after about 3 years, and then possibly invest in an online video streaming program which will allow better functionality for viewers of council planning and zoning board meetings, and ultimately increase transparency to the public because the meetings will be a lot better organized from the video software. Continuing on the path towards GIS implementation, IT is going to be prepared to look at various forms of software that will be both internal and external, and then obviously the eventual onboarding of the hopeful GIS specialist. Lastly, as we've all witnessed throughout the country, the volume and sophistication of cyber attacks are growing, and to defend against these changing threats, we must take steps to protect our networks, devices, programs, and data. IT is continuing to improve its antivirus software, virtual network practices, consistent attention to updating drivers and software, and last but not least, making a strong effort to make sure that staff are trained for phishing, different phishing attempts, which IT did perform some of those exercises about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. We had a really good participation rate. We had some failures at the beginning, but we got better over time, which is the whole purpose of those things. But they do promote people, thinking twice before they click on something in an email, and they also make us a little more aware of what's out there with just changing threats. I know sometimes we see various email addresses that come through, maybe a UPS shipment is here and you have to click here to track, but IT is really steadfast in terms of trying to promote that training, and that's a big part of cybersecurity. Lastly, from an IT capacity, they have come a long way in the last 6 months or so with the internal staff. Looking at the budget is really nice being able to look, kind of 1 year, 2, 3 years out to see where we can make those efficiencies and make things a little bit more effective. Staff, department heads have been really great about providing their own needs and wants, and they're doing a good job, advocating for the departments, but also understanding that, the budget has some constraints. We're trying to do our best to make sure it's working as efficient as possible. I know there's probably some questions about software inventories, things like that. I'm happy to answer whatever questions mayor and council has.
I'm going to start Jenny on the David.
Yeah, so you talked about streaming, and I know it's kind of frustrating because streaming actually is not, you don't have to pay. There's like free software that is good software, and the school does it. So, and I offered to come in and try doing it myself, but I couldn't, nobody would let me actually do it. Like I couldn't, everybody was too afraid I would mess things up. but, you know, so I couldn't do my own real kind of troubleshooting. And it's really frustrating because streaming should not, it's not hard, it's, you know, and the school does it, so can we, I mean, I would really feel like I might be able to figure out how to do it myself.
Yeah.
But if not, what about asking, if you don't trust me, which, I don't blame you for not trusting me. But even though I kind of think that you should, since no one else has been able to figure it out.
Katie, I trust you.
You know, you really, when you troubleshoot, you have to unplug things, and you have to, you know, see if things work, and they break, and then you're like, oh, and then you fix it. Not being able to stream is just, there's no, we should be able to stream. There's a free software, I think I sent you the name of the software that people use. It's very reliable, and it's very easy, and if nobody in our IT can do it, maybe we could borrow the school's IT, because they do a really good job over there at the school, so that's really frustrating for me that we haven't been able to stream.
No, I totally understand. 2 points. One is, first and foremost, I do trust you. And I think the only reason, and we always appreciate troubleshooting from people that can have that experience and they know other people that have done it. That particular instance I will speak to, I think it was just because there was a meeting that evening, I believe, and we just wanted to make sure that it was going to operate.
No, I understand,
With
it
all
was
due
kind of
respect.
frustrating.
But moving forward, no, I mean, I understand the streaming services shouldn't be costly. The repair that I was talking about with regards to the actual hardware, once that gets what it needs to get done, I think that's when streaming should be an opportunity. I think the problem they're running into is that the hardware is malfunctioning. That's why the audio wasn't working. Once that's fixed, I think we'll have a better grasp in terms of where to go from there. And the one example that you would send over to me, we'll take a look at to see if that's a possibility or not.
I mean, if it's coming into your computer, all you have to do is put the software on the computer that it's coming into, and then it goes back up and streams to YouTube. It's pretty simple. And then the other question is about, you know, that now the threats are mostly that ransom type viruses or the bad guys.
Yeah.
And the way to protect against that is just to have a really robust backup system.
Yep.
Because if they ransom you and you say, go to hell, or no, excuse me, you know, because I have it all backed up,
Yeah.
then you're not vulnerable. And I just want to make sure we're doing, I mean, everybody's backing up every day.
Yeah,
That's the
on
same
Wednesday, actually, the
Yeah.
IT coordinator and myself are attending the Municipal Access Liability Joint Information Fund. They're doing a special cyber attack training with the JIF, and that was one of the items that they had promoted, was the ransomware attacks.
Oh, that's good.
To prevent those. But yeah, that's definitely at the forefront of the priorities.
So just a quick follow-up to that, because that was on my list, Dwayne, you said, do we have a policy in place? Like, somebody contacts us and says, okay, I've gotten your website, I've, you know, stolen your data. Do we have a policy? Is it subjective? Is it fast and firm?
I mean, there's a general policy. We've gone over this with the consultant R&D, who's kind of gotten us up to speed. Because again, you know, from 6 months ago, we've come quite a long ways, but there is a general policy what to do. What we've been discussing with the consultant is writing more specific policies, because there are a few different ways that it can go quickly. But the backup of the storage, as Jenny was talking about, that's usually the forefront of everything. Because that way you do hold the cards, even though they think they do.
We also get assistance through our insurance company. They provide, I believe it's like a hotline, where you can contact people, get advice when these issues happen. So that's another kind of resource that we have.
Yeah, so I'll chime in with my pet peeve, you know, which is trying to go paperless with our application, you know, our land use applications and other kinds of form filling out and stuff like that. I know it's difficult because it actually sort of straddles different departments, so IT has to be involved, engineering has to be involved, planning has to be involved. I also know that there are state requirements, you know, for things that have to remain on paper, but I'm hoping I'm the recruit for the IT committee for next year, so I think I'll be able to be involved in that. I just want to, reiterate the goal and to, suggest that it's something that's a fantastic service for our end users. It's a big piece of user-friendly government. I hear all the time from other architects who work in other communities where not only could they submit, their drawings electronically to the building department, but they can go online and check and see who's inspected, who hasn't, who's reviewed the drawings, who hasn't, where is it in the approval process stage, and then could go all the way from the beginning of the development application, to not just building code stuff. So it's a high priority for me, and I'd love to figure out how to get the departments that need to get together to start working on it.
Sounds good.
And just to piggyback on that too, I think it ties into this whole Monument Hall, Witherspoon Hall combination, because, depending on how much space is being used for storage, physical storage, if we can reduce that, you can possibly get like another office, which would be expensive to build. So, for all the reasons David said, and also makes it easier, I think, for residents who want to get information, might be able to help cut down on staff time in responding to OPRA requests, because most of the OPRA requests are for different, it's a lot of it's going to the construction building department, right? So.
I just want to say, I just got a notice that my neighbor is applying for a zoning variance, and, I have to come down here during business hours to look at the plans. So that's not, it's really not convenient at all.
Not easy.
Yeah.
So I just have one thing that hasn't been touched on again, I'm not sure, it goes under IT. Chief Sutter, our police chief, had indicated some time ago that he was thinking about body cams, and I don't know if he has put in a request for that, but if we're looking at a 6-year budget and that's not in there at all.
That would be under his budget, so it's
So
a conversation we should have with him.
yet.
Right, these are just the 4 departments, but that's, even though it's tech, it's under police, not IT.
Hey, there were police radios on here, so I saw little entry points in
Yeah,
there.
That's a good
no,
point.
it's not a good
All
question.
right, okay.
I have a question just about procurement, because there's so much being bought through here, and I assume most of it is just done automatically through state contract. And have we looked at other ways of procurement that maybe bypass that and will get us better deals and more modern equipment? Just, I feel like the experience we had with the main meeting room was not one I don't think any of us would want to repeat. And I don't know if that's typical of the state contract and what you end up with. I went to something at the league, and I know a lot of it's going down to the league in the fall, but they usually have some sort of procurement session where, especially around IT, that there might be other ways of getting these items where we'll end up with something better and cheaper.
I know the last 6 months we've had some really good discussions with the school, particularly because of the shared network services that we have with them, and then the shared network specialists. So we've had a lot of discussions about different hardware, hard drive destroyer, things that not one particular facility needs, but both could use.
Right.
So those discussions have started. What's nice is our IT coordinator meets with the school every 4 to 6 weeks, and they do discuss a lot of those things. But back to Jenny's point in terms of the different technologies that are out there, we're all ears when it comes to, everybody is kind of active in technology. We're all ears for those types of strategies to try to make things a little bit easier.
Right.
One thing just in general in terms of purchasing, one of the things that you guys have seen it lately is we are using other avenues besides the state contract. You're seeing a lot of the co-ops,
Right.
which are a new opportunity to look at. So we have been using a number of the different co-ops that are out there to see if we can get those at co-op prices versus the state contract.
Okay, good. Are there any other questions on IT? Okay. Michael, you're up for
Oh, boy.
planning. He's been waiting.
I'll bring it home, okay, I'll bring it home. I think I have the best report to make in terms of capital expenses because I'm not asking you for any money. So there's a headline.
That's a good start.
But I think, you know, as you well know, planning is focusing on a lot of your major goals that have been moving slowly or need to move faster. Certainly code harmonization, which is bringing our former borough and township codes into sync and making more sense for the consolidated Princeton. Of course, that's no longer the goal, and we're working on that. And thanks to the support of the council, we have some currently have some consultant assistance with that, so hopefully we'll be moving that a little faster. What's come out of a lot of the, well, I'll first highlight some of the other things that you know are going on. The neighborhood character process, we're hoping to start, Councilman Quinn was talking about it today, getting phase 2 moving. I'll be reaching out to the consultant team on that. Councilman Cohen's heading up the redevelopment ad hoc committee for the seminary and the neighborhood there, and that process is underway, so we're working on that. One thing we've done internally is work to better streamline historic preservation and the Historic Preservation Commission within planning. And we think we're getting some good results in terms of customer service and processing of intake of applications and filing and that sort of thing. So, and also, what we're trying to do is to give Elizabeth Kim, our Historic Preservation Officer, some backup, you know, in terms of other staff being able to answer some of the questions that she had to do by herself. So I think that makes a lot of sense. It's a good example of how you can improve a system without really having to add staff or add resources. So those are some of the major things we're working on. The other ones are in front of you. What I wanted to mention is I'm really happy that I'm here tonight with engineering and infrastructure and operations. Because I think what planning can do more of in the future is address some of the needs that those departments have, but they're so busy doing the day-to-day things to keep the town operating. We could probably take some of the burden of doing some of the long-range planning and the short-term planning. It came up before about Monument Hall and looking at the municipal buildings and what makes sense, space needs. That's planning, and we could really help with that. And I think what we could do is going back to the master plan, and this is something I wanted to say, this would be something that, an investment that I would ask the municipality to consider. We really do need an updated master plan, which most of you know. We did, the last time we looked at the master plan, there's a 2017 re-examination report, which basically said the master plan needs to be updated. I mean, the master plan you have in place before the examination report talks about the old library and the borough hall and town, you know, it's really outdated for lots of other reasons. We also have the interesting situation that the Board of Education, the school system, really needs to look at their facility needs. And we could really work with them on that. It's a great way that we could partner. We're already doing that informally. And I think, you know, if we tackled, let's say, I think the element that's the most urgently needed, the elements being the chapters of the master plan, the one that really needs to be done first probably is community facilities because it's so out of date. And that's where we could tackle things like how much municipal space we need and where. And like I said, working with the Board of Ed about school facilities and space. So I think that's where we fit in with this evening's discussion, where we can really bring that service and partnership to these other departments. We're not capital operations heavy, we're more strategic and planning, and I think that would hopefully free up departments that are already very busy. You know, they'd still be obviously working with us, but maybe we can help with the burden of that and be thinking more long-term and strategically. That was my thought as far as what we discussed this evening. Even things like also going off the theme of partnerships, it was mentioned about GIS, and I just came out of county government where we had a large GIS component where we would make that service available to municipalities. And I've already talked to a lot of the staff in Mercer County that do. So maybe there's some ways that we could better utilize what the county's doing and not have to do it all internally.
That'd be great.
So just some thoughts that way where we can do a little more partnering. Also, of course, with the state, doing a lot of interaction with Green Acres, with SHPO, and the other state department, state agencies and offices. Maybe there's ways that we can really help with grant writing and applying. I mean, you've been really successful. I mean, engineering has been really successful, but maybe we can even assist you with that with some other design initiatives. So those are some of my thoughts. Not so much capital intensive, but maybe helps with the overall expenses of the municipality.
Jenny and then Lisa.
What's going on with the the design guidelines, maybe that's for David too, I don't, you know, for historic,
Historic preservation.
yeah, are we working on that?
It's just authorized to work with a consultant.
Oh, we did?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I mean, I think the consensus on HPC has been that they need
Right,
help. It's not
that's what I
something they're doing
understood,
now.
yeah.
So I'm pretty sure we actually budgeted for it
Yes.
in 2019, but it's just with all the other stuff
Yeah,
planning's been working on, we hadn't gotten around to. And actually, Mark, you had worked on the request for proposals for that, right?
Yes.
So is that sort of ready to go?
Actually, that's probably part of what I already shared with planning. So I have a copy of what I've worked on, so it should be, you guys should be.
And that's a great example of where instead of Elizabeth trying to do it by herself, in addition to the day-to-day things, we can help with that. So
Yeah.
I think since we brought her into shop more or less, you know.
Yeah.
those things.
and then do you see going electronic or how,
I do. David was right in that there's some restrictions on us under the municipal land use law and OPRA and some other regulations about what kind of plans we need to keep in the office. But I would love to cut down on having, especially mailing gigantic sets of plans and then, you know, board members having to open big sets of plans. It's just ridiculous. I mean, we need to get
Yeah.
smarter. Other places I've worked, municipal and county, we've always had digital submissions in addition to minimal paper submissions.
yeah,
I'm gonna look at trying to figure out what makes sense.
That's
to balance
great.
that, Because we just have way too much paper coming in and out of this building.
And it's gonna save us money too, because if we have to go back and digitize everything.
Yep, that's
It's
true.
like, if we can have a plan, so like, we just, at some point in 10 years or whatever it is, we can get rid of the paper
It's better for record
and hold on
keeping,
the
storage,
digital.
and it's
yeah.
accessibility, you know,
Yeah.
to the public, so they
I
can get a
think
plan
we-
right away.
We may have actually gotten something about that into the harmonization stuff. I was harping on this when we were working on harmonization of the land use administrative stuff. And I think we do now require an electronic copy along with paper copies, so at least we won't have to scan.
Right, and that's.
But I'm not sure if it's being enforced, you know, because.
Well, I'm
it's sort of
looking at it
the
because I'm
rules that we're-
surprised it wasn't being done here. I mean, really, everybody's doing that.
Yeah.
We have to catch up on
And
that.
also they're doing, it's not like it's an extra expense on their end, because
Yeah.
they're
Well,
already
no, they usually ask
doing it
us,
on
do you want
pad,
it?
yeah.
You know, we get asked by applicants, do you want it digitally? And then
Right.
when we tell them no.
Right?
Really? You know, so
Yeah.
it's, we'll get catch up. We'll get
That's
up
it,
to speed on that.
hopefully that's.
and also at planning board meetings, for the members of the public, I mean, it would be better to have, ask the applicants to be able to put them on the big screen too.
Oh, yeah.
Because when they put them on that easel, when I was on the planning board, I brought binoculars because I was on this other end. And it really helped.
And I know you've noticed that when we have someone like the university or a large,
Glasses.
Yeah.
a big application that has professional staff representing them, they usually have a good PowerPoint.
Yeah.
They're all up to date.
Yeah.
And we can kind of make that more the regular way of doing business.
I mean, I really think that all applicants should be, you know, encouraged to do that, because it's not, surely if they have a professional drawing, they can manage a PowerPoint.
Yeah. We want to just find out how much we could do digitally and how much we still have to rely on paper, but there's a better balance than we have now. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
Yes, so my question, I saw that you listed on here US Census
Mhm.
liaison. What role would they?
Well, what we do is, I was listing under our responsibilities, with, like the census is coming out, as you
Right.
know, 2020. So we've been getting the information, we've been filling out surveys, and when they need information about Princeton,
Okay.
we've been sending them back. So I was just highlighting
So
that.
it's from the department?
Yeah, so if you have any
Okay.
questions, or the public has any questions about the census, how it affects Princeton, you can start with us, we'll find out. what you
So
need.
I bring it up because I just recently returned from a conference where one of the sessions focused on the upcoming census
Mhm.
and some ideas on how we can reach our historically undercounted communities. So, and in fact, next week, I hope to introduce a resolution to establish our complete count committee.
Okay.
So would this census liaison be,
Well, what I meant by that was that we've been the point place, I guess, for where when information comes into the municipality. You know, my predecessor, Lisa, was doing the same
Okay.
function. So I wanted you to know that if you had any questions about information that was coming to Princeton for the census, it's probably in my
okay,
office.
I do, and I will be reaching out.
Okay, we'll help whatever we can do.
All right, thank you.
Are there any other questions for Michael? Okay, thank you. That's exciting stuff. And then I just wanted to open it up again for anybody else here to comment. Yeah, Mia?
I'm wondering what the process is for hiring a new director of operations and infrastructure. I think this is really one of the most important decisions that will be made. And number two, I'm wondering, can you find someone as amazing as the hire that recently happened?
We would find the Michael.
And again, it'll be similar to all of our other process. We're preparing a job description and an announcement that'll go out. We'll advertise for it. There'll be an internal committee of staff. We'll conduct interviews, introduce the person. We'll probably bring in the council to have them kind of have a chat with some members of the council. It'll be the regular process that we use in terms of hiring our employees.
Because I feel like it perhaps might need something that's a bit more concerted than just the regular process. I know on the district side that they required a lot of extra time and effort to find the right person for facilities. And
quite frankly, when I say the regular process, we do a thorough process. As you can see, I mean, we have some amazing employees in terms of really getting the top employees. But that, to me, that when I say regular process, to me that's the regular process. We will look for the best employees we can that makes the best fit for Princeton. But it will go through, when I say normal, I'm just meaning in terms of, we'll advertise for it, we'll look for the appropriate places where we think we can find an employee or a candidate that will fulfill what we're looking for in terms of where we advertise. We'll do our due diligence in terms of interviewing, reviewing their credentials, those things. But, I take this very seriously on all the positions, from the very lowest positions to the top positions.
And how long approximately is the time frame? Just curious. I mean, it's hard to say for sure, but.
At this point, we don't have a process set up, so I couldn't tell you at this point.
I just want to follow up on Mia's with a little bit more specific question, because one of the concerns I've had is about, who reviews the job description. Because there are a lot of policy considerations that go into writing a good job description for a position at this level. And I know, when the planning, we're very happy with the result, but I certainly didn't see, I never saw a job description, was asked to comment on it or anything like that. Whereas, being on planning board and on council, I would have thought that something like that would have come my way at some point, so.
It was reviewed.
It was, I saw it, and I know Wanda saw it.
Wanda saw
so
it.
And I saw it too.
Yeah.
Well, that's.
But I'm hoping you'll see it again, because we did make some.
So is that what personnel?
Yeah, so if the person goes to the personnel committee, it's more likely it'll be reviewed at, it does circulate around.
Jenny and Tim might have been on the planning board at the time the announcement went out.
I definitely saw it.
That doesn't,
Maybe that's
that's
it.
not right, because I've been on since I was on council and we left that right.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure then. But,
I mean,
yeah.
it's not about me.
No, I
as
totally
long as-
understand.
No, but
Yeah.
but I agree with you. I think we all agree
Maybe it's
that
helpful to do.
I think we need to have the council look at the job description.
Yes. Yeah.
That's the message.
And it always goes through personnel, quite frankly. We
Right.
review these at personnel. And likely, particularly when it's at a director level, it usually goes through either that, if there's an associated committee that's involved,
Right.
we discuss it there. So more likely it'll be personnel and public works.
Yeah, Michelle.
Thanks. Michael talked about the master plan and re-looking at that, redoing it, updating it. Is there a time frame in that? I know you don't have a budget, and I know that a lot of times these things have gotten kind of kicked forward, maybe not having enough personnel, staffing to do that. And also the harmonization of the two, the borough and township has still not been harmonized in terms of zoning, which on the zoning board is really difficult.
Yeah.
So you know, that seems to keep getting kicked forward, and you didn't put a budget forward, but is there a need for resources to make those two things happen? Because they're big projects.
Yeah, I mean, I think harmonization is picking up speed now because we're meeting more frequently. We've got a consultant assisting us. I think you're going to see a lot more movement there to bring the borough and town, former borough and township codes together in a more modern and updated. We're not just merging them, we're also improving them. And you'll be seeing both the planning board and the zoning board will be seeing that, the proposed changes. The master plan, I think the best way to sort of take a bite at the master plan and approaching that, because it's such a big effort, is to really sort of look at the different elements. You know, you've got transportation, housing, general land use, community facilities, historic preservation, all different things. And as I said earlier, I really think community facilities is probably where we need to focus first because it's so outdated and it affects so many of the decisions that the council's going to be facing. That's just my impression being here
Yeah, I agree.
8 months or whatever. But that will have to be budgeted, but I don't think it'll, if we better go to budget the whole master plan, you could probably do it by element, yeah. And I'll be working with Mark to figure out what that costs.
Would it make sense to send maybe the different parts to BCCs that are on point first, maybe so they can maybe take a first look at it or suggest like priorities,
As far as the
etc.?
master plan?
Yeah,
Well, the master plan
it wouldn't
would
make
be-
sense to do it that way?
The master plan, I would assume, would be a grassroots, community-based, ground-up.
That's my
you know,
point.
effort.
So would it
the
make sense
first
to look
step-
at
yeah.
if there's a BCC on point for that section to start
Absolutely.
suggesting what improvements should
The
be?
first step is us to get out of this building and out there to the community, and that's how you start the conversation. So, you know, first you study what's existing in terms of what we have as a master plan. Then you find out what the existing situation, like if we were doing community facilities, an exhaustive first step would also be an inventory of everything that's existing. And then you start having that conversation.
I'm only suggesting that because I know we've been talking about modernizing the master plan for a while now. And I'm just wondering if that's a way to expedite what we've been talking about for quite a
I'm
few
sorry, I'm
years.
not really clear.
Well, I
What's that
think-
term you keep using?
BCCs.
Boards of commissions and committees.
I think the issue is
I'm
that
sorry, I wasn't-
everything has to come
Like the
through.
Affordable Housing Committee.
Right,
Well,
right.
oh,
That was the
yeah, of
board,
course.
Yeah, but like,
right.
I think part of the issue is like everything has to come through the master plan subcommittee of the planning board. And it's a major effort. So
Right.
each element is like a 6 to 9 month effort, even if it's been worked on at the BCC level. So we already have like a sustainability element
Mhm.
that sort of has been worked on by the PEC, which it's just,
In the
It-
bullpen.
yeah, it's sort of like the bottleneck is, or if there's a nicer term for that, is the master plan subcommittee. So it's
But
not
that's a
so
good point, the
much,
sustainability, that's sort of already drafted, so you'll
Right.
probably see that first, and you'll probably see it early next year.
right,
But that's kind of my point also.
yeah, but I mean, I think it's a good idea to sort of start, like Michael's saying, at the BCC level, but I don't think we can farm it out and expect it to be like, if every BCC is working on their own element, that we can then be done with the whole thing in a year, because it just takes a while, unfortunately.
The housing element is updated along with the affordable housing plan, so the entire element is up for grabs at that point, or?
Well, it should be, I mean, I think
Okay.
once we have our fair share plan and we've got projects that we know are gonna be underway, we should just look at housing in general for the community. But it's kind of interesting, it's an interesting point you raised, because we're kind of already working on housing by working on the non-conforming affordable housing, so I think
Yeah,
that's a
but
lot
I
of
think
work.
there are other goals
Oh, I
that
agree with
council
you.
has about housing that.
Housing broadly, like
Yeah.
what's the impact of all the institutions and schools on housing? I mean, everything we can think of. Yeah, there's so many issues.
Exactly.
Question, Michael. The consolidated plan that we're gonna put together for the community development block grant, would that help? Could we kind of marry those two together with some elements of the master?
It would, and it'll probably ask you how up to date is your master plan. So, you know, it sort of echoes why we need to start working on our
Not
master
very.
plan. But I think also like,
Yeah.
if we're looking at like community
Transportation.
facilities and housing, that goes, and even infrastructure, then we're you know, CDBG would like to see that we're updating our goal setting and our priorities. I mean, it kind of all, I think it all reinforces.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, Adam?
And maybe you already talked about this, so I apologize. Affordable housing, it stymies a lot of movement because you don't know numbers. Are the numbers coming
The numbers have been out for about 2 years now.
745?
753.
But is it going to really be 753 and what kind of, is it more specifics I mean?
Well, we know that's the number, that's the obligation, and we get bonus credits and we built quite a bit of it because that dates back to 1999. And then it's just a question of how you achieve meeting that obligation. So there are going to be parts of the plan that are built at 100%, which means that every unit is an affordable unit. There might be other parts of the plan where we have inclusionary housing, where there's a percentage that's affordable, and then a percentage that's market rate. So that's a part where we're still negotiating and putting that plan together, and we need to have a plan that's accepted that can be supported by Fair Share, because that's the advocacy group for affordable housing, because they've been given special status by the court, and then it needs to be approved by the
No,
court.
I understand all that, I just,
Right.
so you don't have, it's not there yet, because it just, when you get.
No, I think that the broad outlines are there. So in terms of planning, I think it's,
There aren't gonna be big
You know,
surprises anywhere.
no, and also it's like, we could build 10 new houses, and how many children are those 10 new houses? If that's a question about like the school impact, it's
Well,
like,
it's everything. It affects
right, but even everything, it's like, what are the impact of those 10 houses? And there's gonna be a range, and that's just with 10 houses. So you multiply that, you're not ever gonna be able to say, like, here's the number, here's the exact impact.
Okay, no, I got
right?
it, broad
Yeah.
range, okay, we got it, okay. I kind of got the gist of this.
Are there any other questions or comments from the public? All right, any other final comments from council?
This was a great process. I love having this so early. I love being able to hear from you and to have a discussion. So really appreciate all the work that everybody put into bringing this to the table so early. So.
Yeah, no, it's really useful. I think it's even for those of us who've been around for a while, it's really useful to hear what sort of the departments are thinking of and the big questions in the years ahead. I think it's useful for the public. And so we just heard from 4 departments tonight. I've been talking with Mark. A lot of the other departments are more like planning in that they don't have major items for capital. So we might experiment with bringing a couple of the departments in just as part of a regular council meeting, and we'll see if we can get through the other departments like that without having another special meeting, but we'll have to play it by ear. And then it'd be good to get people's feedback after this whole process, and then we can rejigger things next year too, based on what works well and what we need to improve on.
You know what, I just want to add one more thing about the staff, especially if I seemed ever critical. I didn't need to.
You take it all back.
And really, I want to
Jenny gave an 8:30.
Just saying, if there's a dump truck across the street, maybe we can share it.
No, I do, I really appreciate you guys, and I want to say, please push back against me too. Maybe you didn't want to push back in front of everybody. But I really do know that you know more about what's going on than I do, and all of us. I mean, I think we all know that, and so, you know, I hope you all know that we appreciate you, at least I know we all do.
Yeah, we all do. Thank you. All right. And with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of adjourning?